Hi everyone, I welcome you to this webinar on API management. And my name is Aakash Sharma, and I am working as a senior technical architect, digital and analytics with HCL Technologies. Are you all able to hear me? Maybe you can just raise your hand in case you are able to hear me, or one of you can just confirm that you are able to hear my voice. So first of all, introduction of why are we here for this webinar. So as we can see that this is about the API management. So the agenda for this webinar is going to be, we will touch upon the history of API and what are the current trends pertaining to API, some best practices, some of my own experiences and observations, and we will have some demos on API related market tools which are available and which I have explored and I would share with them. And in the last, we will have some question and answer session wherein we can discuss your doubts and how progress further in your API journey. So first of all, to begin with, I will start with this famous example that we all must have gone through at some stage of our student life. This is, a classic example of a software data management has requested for a software and a specific way, and it was interpreted differently by the project and the senior analyst. And then by the time it reached the programmers, it was something different, and they interpreted it differently. And by the end, like what came out as a final product was totally different what user wanted. So API is no different, as it is also a software. And just we keep a note of this as we progress further. So basically the term API, if we say, it was initially coined first in 1968 publication, which was titled Data Structures and Techniques, a white paper which was written by I.W. Cotton and F.S. Greatorax Jr. So that was the first time API came into existence. After that, we are sure that in our experience with operating systems, we have heard about API, a lot of system calls make to kernel. In case of operating system, there is the API on top of that that a end user interact with. So that was the second stage for API. And the third stage was somewhere in 1990s, like during when terms and technologies such as RPC, Corba, and Microsoft introduced distributed COM model, right? So all those started invading in, and then API was basically in that context that of these technologies. The next stage came somewhere in early 2000. That was the era of web services, WSDL, XML, RPC, all those were the technologies that were ruling at that point in time. So API was then somehow this application programming interface was used in that context. And we are now in this current era wherein like API, when we say somebody use an API, it is basically in the context of RESTful lightweight web services. Uh, because we have now mobile phones, smartphones, smart devices invading in big time. So that the API context has changed now to mainly REST. And recently, few years back, now RPC is again making a comeback with technologies such as Graph, SQL, and gRPC. Big time, and then the context of API again going to change once these new technologies, they capture on and they make their own market share. So this is a bit of a history about API. And now this is I've just assumed that this is a software developer, right? Only people like who are working in startups or even in colleges, people are exploring. This guy named Raju, he's an experienced Java and Spring developer. So what has happened is that there is a lot of buzz about API and all in the market. And somehow for the past few years, he's been working on APIs, what he thinks are the APIs. He good in Java and Spring, and he makes a container, he makes a service, and he makes a repository, and he has a database, and he interacts. Just create a layer which interacts with all these components. But suddenly there is this buzz in the market related to API. So he's very confused. Is he going to be outdated? All these buzzwords confuse him. Wasn't I doing API and he's in fact completed his Java 8 certification well. So he's not sure whether that amount will be reimbursed or not. Maybe after API he is invade into the market and he's confused that he may lose his job. So is that all just product of his imagination, or all this is going to happen in real? We will find out as we move further. So this is before we could answer this question, let us look at life, post COVID, and obviously pre-COVID as well. So mainly our life these days are revolving around around digital ecosystem. So these are some of the areas which have been described here. So one is obviously the social media, wherein like we are interacting with our friends through WhatsApp, posting our updates on Facebook or Twitter and all those things. The second area is the health. So all health related people are now going for the bands like fit apps, and all those things are there, which are constantly posting your health status on some platforms. The third area is related to the agriculture. The agriculture is also not to be missed out. It is also affected a lot by the digital ecosystem, because now when we talk about agriculture, there are GPS devices which are installed on in tractors, and they capture the soil erosion, what is the quality of the produce. There are drones in the paddy fields and all. So all those are also now not unaffected immediately in terms of digital changes that are happening now in the economy. The next is the productivity part, that how effective or productive I am vis-a-vis compared to what I was doing in the past. The next is transportation. Obviously, we know about Uber and Ola, all these cabs. They have also, in the last few years, become a very vital part of life, and they are also, using a lot of digital technologies for posting the updates, using maps. Where are the cab drivers? From where we can get the cabs and all. And last is the financial aspect of our life, even that is not unaffected by digital. There is a open banking initiative in India, wherein like banks have decided that they can share that the information with companies such as Facebook. So all of the areas you can see that they are affected uh, by digital technologies. There is a term which they refer these days in companies like digital natives and digital disruptors. Basically, people who are changing, the game by evolving through digital media. So, to answer this question, that whether the fear of Raju, the developer who is working on Java and more of hybrid and all, is true or not, we have to look at this ecosystem. And if we see here, the crux is API. So whether it is social sector, health, or agriculture, they all would be using some interface to post the information or to fetch information from the medium, right? So API is there at the backbone of this digital ecosystem. So the API is still going to be there, but the way it is perceived by a developer and the way it is evolved in the last few years is totally different, and that is where the emergence of API is now more as a product, not just as a as a simple service which probably somebody would use for their internal systems. If you have any questions, you can send me. I would be more than happy to answer them. Yeah, I am just unmuting you. In case you have any question, you can just ask me. But
Okay.
please don't interrupt in between, like while I am talking.
Okay, sir.
So as I was discussing with you about the API, right? So if you look at the API, it is not much different from the doors, right? Of our home or office. There are different kind of doors like, which we come across in our daily life. Yeah, all of them have the common characteristic that they will have a handle which will basically push or pull to open. They will have certain color, certain design, and they will differ based on the purpose for which they are used. So API are also can be conceived as kind of doors, and they are doors to assets of the organizations. or they have become more like a product in themselves these days, which we can consider to be, like a mixed veg pickle. So these are the list of topics which I got from Dipali ma'am, on the topics which VIPS students are interested in. And I noticed that most of them are UI related technologies. And I guess all of them at some point, you would need to use APIs, because if you are developing a mobile application, there would be some interaction with the APIs. So my question is that since you would be using these APIs, right? When we create an API, who basically is the customer of API, and how we decide whether this API is good or bad, or is it a hit or a flop? You can raise your hand and I can probably unmute you and you can then answer, or you can just message to me on chat. Okay, anyways, let's move further. So the customer of any API is basically a developer. He can be a UI developer, a mobile developer, or in fact a web developer who would use an API itself, or he would use that API be a part of your API, that the code he will write. So a developer is basically a person who would be your customer. And the way we decide whether this API is a hit or a flop is how quickly he can come to ground or up to speed, and how much he enjoys your API. So how well is your API designed? It all depends on that, right? And as we can see in this picture, that this is the API team, a guy with the briefcase who has all the APIs, all the problems, and there is this app developer who would be using this API, and these are the apps and that he has developed and registered on the App Store. And basically the API itself, as I mentioned, is a gateway to assets, and these assets are nothing but the data and information which lies in your internal systems. It can be your Oracle ATG or your CRM system is holding all this information which we want to expose to outside world through the APIs. And as happens normally in our software industry, right, there are trends and there are buzzwords. Like for example, few just 1 or 2 years back, it was cloud which was ruling, then it came AI and ML which started ruling the market. And suddenly after this whole buzz about digital disruption and all, this is a company which is an established company, a fictitious company that I just took as an example. So they also have heard about the digital revolution, and they also now want to go big on the digital play. So the guy, he came, runs into his boss office with the CEO, and he says, we are also going to go digital. But they have not planned anything, right? You can say, how are we going to handle all these channels like mobile or web, YouTube or Facebook? So he say we can figure that out later. And this is the mistake that they make. And how is this for a mistake? You know, as we discuss about various doors, what do you make about these designs or these doors? Probably only Spider-Man would be able to, use these doors, because one is almost on the first floor and there is no way to reach there unless until you have a ladder. And the second one is totally, covered by the stairs, but there is no way really to reach it directly. So this is an example of bad door design. And similarly, we can also design our API either good or bad. So this is the example of lack of planning, and this is what happens when you don't plan. And this is why API management has become very important these days, because Raju is fine, with the API that he is developing, but there are many Rajus who are sitting there who are working on the API. And if we don't manage them properly, this is the mess that we create, because everybody has their own APIs which they have created. There is no standardization in terms of the codes that you should use, the response, error, and it's all going haywire. So in such a mess, you won't be able to progress further in your digital journey. So that's where API management comes into picture, and that's why it has become as a more of a whole. A lot of companies are now investing big time in API management, and this is there at the if we talk about microservices architecture and all, and this is really the first step, because if your gateway is not working correctly, if you don't have nobody is going to enter and see how beautiful the house is if the door is not uh, attractive enough, and if it is not having proper security in place. So that's what is the idea behind API management. And this is the journey of API, that you just don't go haywire. So this is the API journey, a life cycle of an API. You basically, it's very much what we normally do in a software life cycle, that we plan. So the planning means that you prioritize which APIs are the need of the hour. For example, it could be that you are working on an e-commerce website wherein the company really wants to see this cart functionality working, and it's not that your API team starts working on the account management. So there should be proper sync up. You should plan out which are the features which should go up front, and accordingly the API design has to move in that direction. The second step is related to the design. We say follow the design first approach, wherein like there is a lot of customer interaction. You come out with the API response request formats, do some small prototyping. What are the channels that you will use, whether you would be only catering to the web, or you are also catering to the mobile side, and how you are going to differentiate that response. What normally we should plan for short iteration. And also one important thing is security, that how are we going to address the security concern. Because a lot of times I have seen that companies, they leave it for the end. They say, okay, security will come later on, once all the APIs are working, then we will implement the security at the end. And that creates a total mess, because by then all the teams, they have started using API. There are a lot of dependencies, and you have to kind of post that information. A lot of rework happens and all those things. So pay attention upfront to security. Don't miss out on that. The next is the implementation part, which is obviously very important. Over here, API need to be tested as well, right? We can have a lot of automation around that. There can be a CI/CD pipeline. We can, for example, in case of APG API software, there is APG, wherein like you can link it with your Jenkins and all. There is automated build happening. So all those things can be part of your API journey. The next step is publication, that how people will discover your API. So for example, if you want to use API of, let's say, somebody, some outside vendor, uh, who gives you like transportation info, map related data. So there would be some place wherein you start looking for those, or for example, if you want to use Expedia's APIs, how you would go and where you would search for the APIs. There should be easy way and a seamless way to access that. And the next is operation means that once how we would basically get the analytical information and user information, and how we would get the salesman information, that if something does not go right with the API, how to get recover and all those things. And then it's consumption is how people will consume your API. And another important aspect with API is related to the pricing. So if you have created a good API, and if we are saying that API will, Expedia is exposing their APIs, like in fact the 80% of their revenue is coming from APIs itself. So that means that there will be some pricing and costing associated with the APIs. So how are we basically we would be interested in this consumption data, how people are consuming your APIs. And once the APIs are live, the next step is maintenance. Maintenance does not mean that API will not change. API is a constant journey. So there would be improvement that will be made to API. And we will see some examples, how people have learned from their API journey. They also made those mistakes, even some big companies, and then they slowly progress further in the API development and maintenance. The last would be the retirement stage, when like we have to finally say goodbye to the API that served us so well. And how do we basically retire an API? Are we going to have a replacement for that API, or is it going to lie get a slow death? Like it won't be that one fine day will come and say, okay, this is abandoned altogether. We will communicate to parties that this is the API which will no longer be available. How they have to, it will be deprecated. So what are the alternates and all those things? So this is a complete journey for an API, and this has to be, all these things have to be given attention when we think of API development and management. Talking about the trends, these are the big companies, as I say, that everybody is investing in the APIs. And this is a data till 2018. So you can see the all middleware integration companies like TIBCO and Red Hat, earlier they were investing in the middleware mainly, which was WSDL based, like for example, MuleSoft and all were primarily like ESB related. But TIBCO acquired in 2015 this company Mashery. Red Hat also followed soon, like within a year they acquired this company 3Scale. APG was acquired by Google in 2016 again, and then Oracle. And finally this, the second last, was a big acquisition that happened, like Salesforce, they acquired MuleSoft. So all these companies, you can see, they have invested so much in the API. And the last one that you see is Broadcom in acquired CA Technologies. Broadcom is very different because it's not a typical IT companies as we see in the list. It's mainly like into semiconductor and manufacturing domain, but still, like, they identified that the market would be heading towards, like, there would be a lot of IoT devices and all those things will go big. And they acquired CA. CA was a very big name in APIs during that time in 2018. So that was a very different acquisition that happened. So you can see that how much all these companies, which are not even IT related, they have identified the power of APIs. So I would now touch on the web aspect of the API, mainly from the design and development point of view. If you have any question so far, you can just raise your hand or you can just post to me on chat. Anurag wants to ask. Yeah, Anurag, any question?
Yeah, very good evening, sir. Anurag this side. Actually, sir, the thing is, the point that we have got right now, we got the reasons, that is the history, and apart from this, the next step is matlab, how we can implement API on the current role model, or we have to create a new model for this. That is my query. Like we have some
Sure,
user
sure.
pool,
So,
for example, like we have right now I am a MCA student and we are going to implement some model. So how can we how can we make some categorization, like because it's a very open up, like we can implement API and it's a very completely open up for everyone, and no one, and even without any authentication. So how can we set like this, instead of any deeply going, we can just need some basic steps. That is my main point. Yeah.
sure. Thanks. So we would now touch upon the aspect that you just mentioned, mainly on the
Sure.
practical side, that how we go into the
Yes, yes.
designing and how do we
Yes, sir.
what
Yes,
we
sir.
are doing is right or not.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Yes,
So
sir. That is my
thanks.
main point.
Thank you. I will continue with that. I hope your concerns are addressed in the further discussion. So when we talk about AI, we normally talk about the context of web these days. And so when in case of REST is the standard that we are following mainly for the API. As I mentioned, that a lot of smart devices they ushered in the few years, and we are now mainly using JSON as a format for communication. So REST is basically it's not a standard, but it's a architectural style. So you are free to do your own things. REST does not force anything on you, but like as a good architectural style and good designing principles that we saw, that there are certain standards that can be followed in terms of design, that it allows you flexibility, and because there is a room for doing things, you can go haywire also, because it gives you opportunity, but also at the same time you don't know where you may err or where you can go wrong. There is a term which they use, which is restifarian. Basically this was introduced by Roy T. Field, like in his PhD dissertation. So maybe I hope that after this course and in your API journey, you can also say that there is restivariance. So let's assume, as you just mentioned, that we are going to use some user related data modeling in our college. So I have a lot of users. Let's arbitrarily take an example of dogs. So we are going to design some API related to dogs, and this guy Raju, who was a developer, he created all these endpoints, wherein, like, suppose somebody needs information of all the dogs in my area, he has an API for get all dogs. Then there is a API for get all leashed dogs on the right side. Similarly, like dog, new dog, to create new dog related information. All these are the APIs which have been created. So any idea whether this is a good design strategy, or whether that is more on the following the lines of this design that we discussed? Any idea on whether it's a good or a bad design, like what you see over here in terms of API? I'm sure you must have implemented some APIs or on your own.
Hello.
Okay, I
Yes.
move further.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
We have implemented so many, and they just got some like sign up process and something like they got some new login process and some get and post authentication method. Basically, we are implemented earlier the previous projects. So that is my main question, and now now I got my answer. Yes, yes.
Okay, so do you think this is a good design, the one you
Yes,
see
sir.
here on the screen?
Yes, sir. Technically,
Okay.
it is okay for making some chronicle names. Like, suppose if user want to communicate, then they can communicate easily by this is distinguishing between the names.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is the what Raju did, but there is problem with this is that there are a lot of you know endpoints which have been created, right? And if somebody wants to create some new endpoints, he would come. There is no standardization in this, right? Suppose if I want to get all dogs, then there is an endpoint get all dogs. Tomorrow, that I want to get sleeping dogs, there would be an endpoint get all sleeping dogs. So it will just keep on elaborating, and there might be so many endpoints which can create some mess going forward as we our API evolve. For example, it is only related to dogs right now, but it can be cat tomorrow, or it can be monkey. So many endpoints will create so much mess. So second question is a first rule in fact says that nouns are good and verbs are bad. So in this, you see there are a lot of verbs which are used, right? Where you see I create, do, get. There is no need REST principle say to use all these verbs in your API. Just follow on the nouns, right? Base URL we discuss is the door for your API, and a simple base URL makes it easy to determine whether you push or pull. So can you identify what's wrong with this door? Whether this is okay or something wrong with this door? So the idea is this door does not say how you would open it, whether you do a push or you do a pull. So as you can see, I don't know whether it needs a push or a pull. So that is the problem with this door. And this is the rule 2, which says that use 2 base URLs per resource. So for all this that you are seeing over there, they are saying this can be handled by this simple slash docs. And the verbs that you see, they say already have a methods in HTTP like get, post, put, and delete. We can use them. So this is the rule which says just use 2 base URL per resource. Keep the verbs out because verbs will automatically be provided by HTTP. So as you can see, all these get and all that you are seeing over there, or create that you are seeing. So get, we will have this HTTP verb get. If you want to create something, there will be a post, and if you want to delete, there will be a delete. And for updating, we will use a put. So all this mess that you are saying, that can just be consolidated in this structure, wherein like we just have slash docs, and so there are two ways we will use. One is the endpoint slash doc, other is slash doc slash the identifier, which is a path param here, which means the unique identifier for a dog. So let's say I want to fetch a dog with an ID 1234, I would just mention that ID over here and I will get the details. So the rule 2 says keep the verbs out and use HTTP verbs to operate on collected elements. Similarly, there is a rule 3rd which says, for example, you can say that over here we can use slash doc instead of docs. That can be one way to identify an endpoint. Similarly, in your case, it could be slash student or it can be slash students, right? So which we should use? Normally, like these are the popular APIs. If you see is consistent. Foursquare is using check-ins, Groupon is using deals, and Zappos is using product. So there is no kind of consistency in terms of the URL which these companies are using. And in fact, as I mentioned, REST is okay, it does not impose anything on you, but it is more intuitive to think in terms of plural, right? We normally get dogs, not get dog. So because there can be any number of dogs, so it's basically companies generally they use plural, and that's the kind of approach we should also take, also take, and we continue with that same ideology. The next rule says concrete. Like we have been told, and it has been there in our mind that we should follow as a good architectural design principle abstraction. Always code to an interface, not to an implementation. So that is all there in our mind. But just think of it like an endpoint which is like slash items, and items can be blogs, video, image, news articles. So that just does not make it very informative. What items am I looking for? So generally, if you see the web URLs, they are not following the abstraction principle that much. They normally follow the concrete uh, in their URL. So you would see slash blogs, slash videos. But again, if there are too many assets, like let's say company has 150 kinds of items available, then we can't create an endpoint for all of them, right? In that case, it might be advisable to go for slash items, and we can use some query parameter to say which kind of item are you looking for, or we can add a type over there. So again, there's no strict rule, but just to make sure that abstraction is not something that happens a lot in the rest. The rule 5 is related to association. We understand about dog, right? But what about dogs which belongs to an owner, or student who are having a mentor? All those relationship, how we would basically depict all of them, right? Because it's okay, I need slash dogs, I get the information for dog. But if there are some associations, then how we will fetch all of them? So these are the standards that we follow, right? That slash owner slash 123 slash dog. So that means that for owner with the ID 123, I'm looking out for all the dogs who belong to that owner. Similarly, if student is having a mentor or a must exist association that we normally do in our entity relationship design, then that would be information about mentor. Similarly, again, mentor, if I have an ID of 999, let's say Dipali ma'am is mentoring who all students I want to find that out, then again, using this URL number 3, I can get information. You can say there can be complex relationships, owner, doctor, dogs, food, etc. They can all be thought of as a single kind of a complex relationship. Think of it this way, like normally, it will be only bi-directional kind of relationship. You will not need all this data together. For example, in case of, you take an example of your RDBMS. So there are multiple entities, but still at one point we are only looking for two entities maximum at one point if we want to get some information. So this principle of resource slash identifier slash resource again works in most of the cases. So this is fine. Don't try to go further, and at a further depth. This kind of a hierarchy of two level is okay at rest. Rule 6 says complexities, like we just discussed. Let's say dogs, I need all the dogs. And here we can see there are so many different kind of dogs, leashed dogs, hunger level of dogs. So all that information, they say you can extract from complexity. For example, if you need color equal to red, you can just use a query param as they have used, and that will give you the information related to the dogs. Again, things can go wrong, right? There can be errors that may happen. So there are error codes that we use for rest, which is like 200 for okay, 400 4 series user has inputted something which is not valid, 5 is mainly for something went wrong on the server side, and 3 is redirection related. So these four categories in rest, they will serve all the purpose. This is the status code which is used by different companies. The first one you can see is 200. Okay, let's say I asked for some information and uh, in fact I got some error here, but it is still giving me 200, which is not right. I just mentioned it should be in 4 series. And the company which is having this kind of implementation is a very popular company, and this is Facebook. So you can see even big companies have messed up, in their API journey. This is not the latest update. They may have corrected it, but this is 2018, uh, year when in like even for unauthorization you were seeing 200 as a response code. Similarly, this next one you can see, this is more informative, 401. 401 means that there was some problem with the user login name and he's not authenticated. They in fact give you a URL wherein you can go and inspect what kind of a error is it in the 2003 series, 0003. There is a code associated. So this is an example of a good error code. This is something very informative. I can make out, what happened in this code. The third one is a very basic one, though it says 401, but it does not give me any information. Code 401 is still the same HTTP code, so this is not a good a code, internal code, if somebody wants to know which what was the source of this error. It might be that he was having 3-4 sources like CMS or a database or some other system with which they are communicating, probably their ERP system or something like that. So it's not very informative. So the companies who are implementing are Twilio and Simple Geo. These are their error codes which I have put in the example. These are the error codes which companies generally use. So 4-5 error codes are okay. In fact, as you start off, just start with basic code 200, 400, 500, and then maybe add few more, 201, 304, 404. So these 6-7 is the maximum that should suffice to your needs of API. We should have proper message for developers, because as I mentioned, they have clients, right? So we saw in this example of Twilio that how informative that was. This is another good example. You can see there is a error code, there is more information that I put in. There is a developer message as well. So this is something that you can use as a error code. Then we have trace ID and span ID. What does trace ID and span ID means is that in case of microservices calls, there might be multiple hops, right? It has to pass through. So for example, at one point, it goes to your, if you're booking a flight, you come to this website wherein they pass you to different servers or services which are deployed. So you don't know, where error happened. For example, you might be making a transaction, paying some amount, buying some goods from Amazon, but at the gateway level, some problem happened, something went wrong. So how we would debug and trace out, all this, where the problem occurred or what went wrong with this API call. So normally what happens, as soon as we receive a API call, we create a trace ID and span ID. Trace ID means a single ID which will be consistent throughout that API. We will see it in it. And span ID means that at various hops, it will keep on changing. So a trace ID could be, 1, 2, 3, which will be same throughout the API call. And then we can have different span IDs like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that will go on changing. So we know at which specific point the error happened for a specific API call. Most frameworks, they support trace ID, span ID. Spring has Cloud Switch, and which you can directly like use the annotation in your calls. And similarly, there are JavaScript simple calls based on UUID that we can use to generate trace and span. There are logging frameworks which we will explore, like APIGEE, DLK, Sumologic, wherein like when error happened, we will log all this information. Let's go and do some demo here. Uh, for demo, I am going to use APIGEE as a reference tool. Please be free to explore other options. There are various options in the market, like Sprint has a cloud, Zero that you can use. Amazon has their own API gate. I'm just using it for a demo because it's a bit simple and easy to explore. You can also create your account and explore this. They in fact have a certification as well for APIGEE and Google Cloud in case you are interested. And for logging platform, we are going to use Sumologic. So this is a small life cycle of APIGEE. What happens in APIGEE, there is a proxy endpoint. So let's say I created an endpoint slash docs that we just discussed, right? Or let's take it as slash v1 slash weather. Then the request comes here and there is this target endpoint, which is the HTTP service. This black cloud that you are saying, this could be a server which we don't want to expose to a general public. So this is weather.yahooapis.com. and this is a target endpoint. So what happens when we get a request? It passes through two hops here. One is the proxy endpoint, another is the server endpoint. And then when we hit the service, which is Yahoo service here, then we get a response back. Uh, and then we pass that response back to the client. This is a very common pattern, like you can say a proxy pattern or a gateway pattern that is being used, in most of the gateways. There are a lot of benefits of this pattern. For example, one very apparent benefit is that it automatically takes care of your load balancing. You don't really have to, uh, you know, uh, be worried about what will be the scale of the APIs which requests which are coming, or how many servers you need. You can shield your backend infrastructure from using this gateway, and you can in fact control the number of calls that are made. So there are a lot of benefits, and in fact there are two hooks that we see here on both the hops, proxy and target, which are pre-flow and post-flow. So what happens in pre-flow is as soon as receive a request, there will be a pre-flow hook get triggered. So that pre-flow could do a number of things. Like for example, it can associate a trace ID or a span ID, with a request which just came to me. Similarly, on the post-flow, let's say this old system is giving me a XML response, and I want to pass it to which expects a JSON response, right? So I can do all those transformation in my post-flow. So the post-flow hook can be used for that purpose. There are some other example. For example, if I want to just use some constants or environment URL, I can set them in proxy flow. So this is the interface of a. I've just logged into here. So far, if you have any question, you can just raise your hand and ask me. We are already, I'm in a bit delayed, so I will continue in case all of you are good. In case there is further question, you can just message me or later on. So this is a simple web service, a proxy that I'm going to create. So the proxy name is /v1/greet. Let me create a new one. That just click on the plus proxy, simple proxy that we are going to see. So we are going to use the reverse proxy option over here, which is the most common one. Basically, we are just using an API for inbound traffic. So this is Eve, that the random name I have given to this. This is the target URL. I'm just using a random URL right now for testing. So I'm using http bin.org for this. I'm going to bypass authorization. You can see there is a authorization. There is a quota as well that you can impose. So if you don't want that in a specific time limit, you want only a specific number of calls to be made, you can set it over here. I don't want, we should receive more than 100 calls. You can add, headers over here if you want to allow certain domain calls like from your Angular or app or so on. Right now, I'm going to skip. It's a very simple proxy. I can both HTTPS and HTTP endpoint over here. I'm going to. There are two environments that we can use. One is the product, and there is a test. Let me use the test environment. So my proxy is creable proxy, but it will give you an idea of how the communication happens. So I am going to trace this call now. So as you can see, this is my end URL, right? I can start our session over here. Let me hit this endpoint. You can see that I have received a status code of 200. That means that it went off well, and it gives me a response as well, right? So let me hit this. So I am able to hit it successfully. In fact, if I just put get over here, you can see this gives me the JSON response. So basically it appends, the second part in the call. Whatever I append to this URL, it also gets append to the. So I am able to, see output here. You can see that this is the proxy. The request went to target server here. It is very informative. It is telling me that it went to http://bin.org, and this is the response that I got after this. This is the server that we saw in this diagram, right? This HTTP service, and this is the response that I received. This one. Similarly, for second call, I got this response, which was in JSON format. This one. So this is how the communication happens in case of REST, or rather, I mean my proxies. The second proxy I'm going to demonstrate to what happens, if we get some error. So I have already created this proxy, with just before this session. So this is called greet proxy, or let me go to another proxy. This proxy basically it raises a 400 request. Means that there was some, invalid input that was made from client. So it gives you various policies. As you can see, there are three policies I'm using right now: assign message and flow callout. So what actually happens in case of APIGEE? I mentioned there is a pre-flow, post hook, right? That we discuss about. Similarly, there are faults. So suppose, for example, I hit this endpoint. So basically, this gives me a 400 error, right? I'm not able to proceed further. I have received an error here. So how do we handle such scenario? Because it is giving the page is not working. I want a nice message, something like this. Something like this. I don't want to see that message which we are seeing over there. So how do we respond back to client with a proper message? So this proxy does exactly that. So whenever an error happens in a API, this goes in an error state. As you can see over here, there is an error state. It's marked in red over here that there was a 400 request which happens. What we are doing here, we would be assigning, creating a policy which we call as assign message policy. So this policy will have a message which will be basically a payload, a nice payload which we will put over there with appropriate information that allows a developer to debug things from his side, that what went wrong, what is the cause for this error, what wrong information he has passed. So this is like, we are overriding the response that we got from the our source and messaging it and passing it back to the end user. So this is something that I have put a screenshot from that trace that I showed you, right? Another thing that we will use here is Sumologic logging framework. Let's keep it for later. Just I'm going to show you the output of this trace first. As you can see, this is the assign message I have over here. It has all these variables, which is like the status code, status string, and a code ECA00915, which allows me to find out more about what kind of an error is it. Similarly, I have the message over here that is being given. So this is a simple message. And as I mentioned, that when an error happens in APIGE, there are some fault rules. So fault rules basically they get fired automatically. So here I have it's like a try catch block in Java if I say. So whenever a 400 app error happens, I want to catch it and I want to assign it a assign message policy. Similarly, there are default fault rules which are like finally that can be called all the time, irrespective of what error you got. So I will come to this later on, but this is the assign message that we have got, that we will see in action. So let's just trace the this proxy, the response of this proxy. So I'm again putting this status slash 400. This basically hit http bin.org and then it, whatever is the suffix that automatically gets attached to the http bin.org. So it will be something like this. The final call. I mean, it will be something like this. So you can see that a call has happened, and this is a policy which I have put in the pre-flow hook, which got fired. We will come to it later on. There is this point the request went to target server. Target server was https http bin slash status slash 4 that I just showed you. And then we got some response. What was the response? Response was again a 400 error that we received. See, this is an error. It's signifying that I have received something happened which is wrong. And then I put this assign message, right? You can see that this is automatically worked like a catch and it is assigned a message over here. And then the second part begins. Am I doing after this is, I will come to this. So I mentioned discuss about a good principle of trace ID and span ID, right? So this is an example of a pre-flow hook. So what happens in a pre-flow hook? Whenever I get a request which is not having any trace ID, span ID, I have created a small JavaScript which generates the trace ID and span ID, and it automatically appends it over here. So all the requests which are coming in your gateway, they will now have a trace ID and a span ID attached to them. So this is what happens in the first part. If you go and see the trace, this is what is happening here. I have assigned, the trace ID and span ID through this to some variables. And then the request went to target server. Even target server can use this trace ID and span ID to log information on their side. Then doing when I receive the response back from the target and there is some error that is happened, I have created a small framework of error handling. Just like we do in Java or any other language, we create some framework. So here also we have a framework. And how I have hooked that framework is created a hook again here, which is a flow callout will basically call this shared flow. Shared flow is a generic module, and we will basically let me show you the shared flow also. So this is the shared flow. Shared flow is a common module that all the proxies can use, just like a core component that we create for error handling in any language, Spring or C++ or Java. What we are doing here, it's a very simple, shared flow. It has this message, and this URL is important. This is a collector URL. So what is the collector URL? So whenever an error happens, want to use a common logging framework which we discussed, like Logly or Sumologic. And this is the URL that we created in Sumologic that we are using to log information. And these are all the fields that we have set, over there that you see in the context variables, and some of them like error code message, trace ID, span ID. So all this stuff that you are seeing, we have received from the error object, and now we will log this information in Sumologic. This is a very small framework. I'm just demonstrating what things can happen. And this is Sumologic. Again, I've created a free account here that you can also create, and you can use other frameworks also, like Elastic. They have ELA stack that you can use for logging and all. That is also another option. I hope the flow is clear to you. What is happening is we create a trace ID, span ID, and if error happens, we just put this information in this logging framework, which is exposed to this URL. Let me now try and hit or get an error and see how this whole thing is connected. When I get an error, I assign using assign message, and then this calls the flow that we just discussed, right? And if I go and see this is the object. It is having a trace ID and span ID, which was assigned at the first step somewhere here. Let me go and search in Sumologic whether this log this information or not. So this is the interface of Sumologic. So you can see this is in the last 15 minutes. I have received all these errors. I've just made one call, right? So this is the trace ID, span ID, and this is going central to your whole organization. I mean, or the application. So if it is e-commerce website, they all will use this common logging platform. So there won't, because in case of microservices, there are multiple servers, multiple instances running, right? I can be having hundreds of services which are having their own Tomcat server embedded, in Spring application. So how are we going to trace all this information? So we would basically use this interface of Sumologic or any other vendor to get this information. So I'm demonstrating, what all is possible. Obviously, we are constrained for time, so I can't go very depth of all these things. But I hope there is enough information for you to explore. As I mentioned that basic concepts of design and frameworks are same. So developer Raju, which we discuss, he should not worry. That he is only a Java developer and he does not know about all these jargons of API. And we just saw about this framework that we use. So common sense should prevail, and all the basic design, good practices we should bring into API management. In this fault rule that we saw, there was this attribute always enforce true, not like a finally I just mentioned, right? So this is something that I set over there, and that's why it caught, it caught the exception, and then it also called the finally. I mean, both the things got executed. Some other things which I am not able to cover, but I hope you explore them, are the versioning of API, which is again, how you would basically create a new version of API, because it could be that we created an API, right, but it needs to be upgraded. So it should not be that overnight, we have a new API, because the people who are dependent on your API break the contract, and then they might be, in a suit that they will not know how come something that was working fine till last night has certainly broken up. So you should have a proper versioning available, whether you use it in the URLs like /v1/product. Some companies they use v1.0 abbreviation, or some people they pass it in the headers. So those are some good practices as well. Another is related to the documentation. So documentation is very important. There are open spec APIs which are available. If I talk about specs, you can also create a proxy from specifications. So right now I just created a manual proxy, but I can import or I can create a new spec as well. You can see this is I have created a new spec. So this is the Swagger. Automatically I can see, the whole documentation over here, that what all person expects, what is the size, what is the response I will get. I save it. And I can generate a new proxy from this now. So the proxy that I created manually can be created from here as well. This is another option, see, reverse proxy. And I just want to touch up this, Swagger thing, because a lot of inconsistencies happen, in this stage. So you have a central place where you are documenting all your APIs, and there are various tools, that Spring gives you to generate the Swagger documentation. So what happens is that developers they start using their own ideology. They have a different mechanism for APIs, and the team which is basically publishing the API they start following some other nomenclature. And then on Jira you see there are various project management tools. The definition is totally different from the implementation, and then becomes a very messy job to bring them to a same page or make them consistent. So from the start itself, there should be good communication, and we should be very clear how we are going to make design our APIs and follow that same thing consistently across. The point is that we should treat API as product and distribute, right? So API is your product. You can make them a money vending tool as well. So in AP, you have option for API products. So basically what happens in API product is that you can combine multiple APIs into one product. So let's say I created few APIs for shopping cart. What I can do, I can put them together and make one suite out of it, and then distribute that as a product. So collection of API, let's say some API which gives me weather data, I will make that as one collection, and then that will have all the APIs. See here, I can select whatever proxy I want. I can create one product out. These are things that you can explore, and APG I have chosen because it makes things little easy, because it is a very nice, easy interface. So you can use that for your exploration, but don't be limited to just this tool. If you like it, it's fine. Otherwise, a lot of options are available. There are so many things that I can discuss about API and gateway and best practices, but I think it's just an evolving journey, and I hope I've just opened up the gate for you to sneak in and get enough curiosity I have to begin on your API journey if you have not so far. So I hope that this was a fruitful session for all of you, and I guess Dipali ma'am would have shared to you for the feedback, and you can connect on LinkedIn. This is the URL on which I'm available. You can also mail me on headsakash@gmail.com, or official ID. I will share that with you. So in case you have any questions, kindly just feel free to ask me. Yeah, so I can see some questions already asked. Anurag, how can we categorize in terms of user pools, and how can we authenticate? So for authentication, there is a policy here, OAuth policy. I will just show you. So for authentication, there is this, the general concept is for APIs, there would be a token. like if you have worked on GitHub and all, they are following this policy that if you use their SDK, they will give you a token, right? Using which you can authenticate, and then so it's the same mechanism. You can have this policy, OAuth policy. This one we have OAuth 1 as well as OAuth 2. So if you look into the documentation in APG, you will get entire steps. This is the 4-minute video. This is a very informative video, that they have created by APG team itself, where you can, in 4 minutes, they will give you the crux of all the API. In fact, I will suggest, that we can do our own implementation of OAuth and all. But if we use these policies and all, somewhat, I feel the concept becomes very clear to the mind, that we can use the same concept in something like plain Java as well, because a lot of things are encapsulated here, like when we are using the OAuth to policy, but it makes it very clear and it makes it very easy to implement. So all those options are available that you can try to look into it.
Yes, sir. Sir, sorry
I
to
hope I
interrupt you and
answered
thank
this.
you. Yes, sir. Sir, my question is any industry, matlab, for example, you are from SCL Technologies, and is it requirement mostly in many companies, and some type of certification is be required for this API concepts or something
For
in term of
certification of
industry? Yes, sir. Yes, yes, yes. For
no,
API,
it's not mandated.
okay,
No.
okay. And industry, is it very good opportunity for us if we move on to the industry next
So
year?
actually,
So,
I'll tell
yeah,
you,
yes, sir.
if you are going for Google Cloud certification, then
Okay,
they have APG engineering engineer also as part of that. And in fact,
okay, okay.
some year ago they released coupons which were freely available, because they took over APG in 2000, right? So at that time they came out of this scheme. They were distributing free coupons, and
Okay.
all this stuff was available, online. So and it's not very difficult exam as
Mhm.
well. So obviously it gives you more credibility if you have a certification, but it's not that if you don't have certification, if you have the knowledge about these things, somebody will not be impressed or they will
Okay.
not consider you, but it just gives you a better weightage that you have a certification as well.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, sir. Very informative, and thank you.
Thank you. I will take some more questions. Like naming of URLs is not good. So in my examples that I was doing, it was just a demo. Don't use them like mainly like greeting and greetive or all. But the ones that I showed in the slides, they were actually standard. So try to use the same ideology. We can remove handles. Pre-flow and post-flow, you are saying, yeah, you can remove it or it's optional, whether you implement a pre-flow hook or you implement a post-flow hook, depending upon your requirement. Because in case you don't want to generate any trace or span, you just want a simple get call, then there is no need to associate any pre-flow hook over there. Get should be mapped using annotation. Yeah, if you are using Java, that can be done, right? I think showed in that example hello world, but here we don't have any annotations because it's APG. And at the back end, like the source that we were seeing, right, the target, that can be a Java server, that can be a microservice, like which gives you product information. So you have to implement in whatever language like you want to over there. Does API design pattern differs from mobile and web? What different thing? Yeah, so this is a good question. Does not differ for mobile and web. In fact, your API should design should always be independent. You should never think about it, and it's a very common case that API designer will go to you, and he will say what things you expect in your in the API as a response, because they are not the people who should tell you how you design API. API design should always be independent, and it should not be dependent on a channel. You can pass in header, this is a good practice. Use a channel, like whether you are getting it from a mobile or you're getting it from a web. So in case you want to return some extra param or you want to do some massaging, you can do over there. Another pattern that you can do is opposite pattern. So what happens is, let's say you got some call, and you want to hit 2-3 target endpoints. It's not just only a single place you want to get all the data. You basically, for example, want to hit some, for example, take the checkout data, right? So one company gives you the suggestions that you see at the end, like when you go to Amazon, you see all these suggestions and recommendation engine that gives you. Another gives you, let's say, ratings and reviews. So those can come from multiple sources, and depending upon the which channel you are targeting, web or mobile, that part can change. I hope I answered that, Anmol. And can you share link in chat, Gitansh? Which link are you referring to? Okay, you can, Gitansh, you can just mail me. I will send that information to you. I hope it was informative to you, and thank you, everybody. Please give your feedback, and I hope there are more sessions like and I can probably discuss more on the microservices side. And I also, it was first time for me, so I did not know. And in fact, I asked the Pali ma'am also that whether I should focus more on the technology side or more on because it's a first session, so I don't really know how much get interested in the on the technical or on just to knowing the principles of microservice and how we start off with microservices. So you can give your suggestions like on what technology you're interested in, and then we can have some more session on that. Thank you again. Be safe and healthy, and let's continue sometime in future.